So lately, you've been hearing about George Floyd, you've been hearing about systemic racism. The one thing that I really want to deal with today is this idea of the police committing genocide against African Americans. This has been a tough one for me. I'm very close to the police department myself. My dad has been a police chaplain since, before I was born. And I've always had that close tie and that heart for what our police officers do every day. And then I started to get older, and I saw all of these Black Lives Matter protests. I started to hear about police brutality, and I started to see all of these different statistics and different numbers about how people are being killed left and right, and how police officers are not held accountable. And just this past week, John Oliver put together a video about police brutality, and he used a couple of different sources. There's this one specifically I want to talk about called mappingpoliceviolence.org. Now, when he brought this up, of course, I'm always skeptical about people's sources. And then even further than that, when I was watching it and saw it, I saw Stephen Crowder make a mention before he got into his rebuttal. He said, all of these numbers that John Oliver talks about are true. That got me thinking, I don't really know anything about the numbers. I might have to check that out myself. So, grabbed my phone, looked up this website, which was one of the sources that John Oliver used, and I don't find a single freaking thing he says to be true. As a matter of fact, I've come to question a lot of things that people say, and we could get into police brutality and racism in the police departments and across the U.S. and whatnot. Today, though, I specifically want to focus on the one point of genocide. The police are not committing genocide against African Americans. And I am going to show that to you using this source that John Oliver used to say the opposite. Because I believe that once you start to break those numbers down and you look at them realistically, you will find that the opposite of what he says is true. And I understand that many of you will not believe me. People get emotionally attached to the things that they believe. However, I hope that this is a starting point for you, that it challenges you to get into those numbers yourself and to look at these cases through the eyes of the police officers and through the eyes of the community. And keeping in mind all of this data that you're hearing over and over and over, I hope that me using the same source as John Oliver, saying the opposite thing, helps to give you a better perspective of what's going on in the U.S. So let's try to get this going and get through all this quickly and not waste all of y'all's time just rambling. Before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about the methodology. The methodology of this website, they want to be very straightforward about the things that they're doing. They give you on this first slide here, the definitions of police killings and people coded having a vehicle. They talk about a person being coded as unarmed. I appreciate them giving all of that, but I immediately have a problem, if you see on this first slide, holding a toy weapon, such as a BB gun, a pellet gun, an air rifle, toy sword. I want to criticize this point for a moment because there are a lot of BB guns and pellet guns that look like real guns, and a .22 is a very dangerous round. It is very difficult for an officer to be able to tell the difference from a distance between a pellet gun and a real gun. So automatically, I'm a little skeptical about what they say about unarmed, but for the case of this study, I don't think we have to make that distinction. For today, we will just count all unarmed as unarmed, and I am counting the vehicle killings as well, because from what they describe here, those who are coded as being vehicle have been coded as a vehicle because they are using a vehicle as a weapon in one form or another. So I am counting them with the allegedly armed killings. So I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about a couple of these things. I want to show you these different evaluations because these evaluations are going to be affected by the numbers I show you in a little bit. Black people are most likely to be killed by police, 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people, and this is given per 1 million of the population. 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed compared to white people, which is a very interesting number. These sound bad so far, right? Where you live matters. 6 times more likely to be killed by police in Oklahoma if you're black than in Georgia. And then over here they have 8 of the 100 largest city police departments kill black men at higher rates than the U.S. murder rate. And they show you all of these cities right here. Here's the interesting thing to me. All of these numbers have a new context once you add in the state-by-state and year-by-year information. 99% of killings by police officers from 2013 to 2019 have not resulted in officers being charged with a crime. 99% over 7 years, all of 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Keep that 99% in mind as we go through these state-by-state numbers. First, we're going to start with Alabama. This is where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, and this is going to take a while. I'm going to go through every state and where it's relevant, meaning where the black population killed is higher by percentage than what the black population by percentage in the U.S. is. Where it is statistically significant, I'm going to include it, but there will be some states where it's so small, I'm not going to include it. We'll start here with Alabama, just to give you a little snapshot of what the race division is. So within a 7-year period, 138 people were killed by police officers in Alabama. And when you look at this, it looks bad, right? Even over 7 years, that is not a good look. That is a terrible thing if all of these people are being killed by police officers, even divided by 7, and you get about 20 people per year, I believe is what it is. That's still a bad number. Here's the twist, though. You see all these other little categories here? Let's check the armed status. If you look at the armed status, the allegedly armed far outswamps everything else combined together. And including, I told you guys I would include the vehicles in this. If you take the vehicles away from those other 3 and add it to the allegedly armed, there's no comparison at all. Even if you include the unclear with the unarmed, it makes a huge difference. By the way, see all those red circles? Those are African Americans. Look at how many African Americans are either armed or allegedly armed. That's significant. That is a big difference. Look over in the vehicle section. You got 4 African Americans that are using a vehicle as a weapon. Again, this is a big deal and it makes a big difference. And although it makes a big difference if the person who's unarmed is being physically aggressive or not, we're still going to count them, just for time's sake. We're still going to count all of those people as being unarmed innocent, okay? That already changes that 99% number I showed you earlier. Now let's flip through the rest of the states and the District of Columbia, which was thrown in with it. Alaska, not enough data here to be statistically significant for race, so it's not included. The allegedly armed far outswamps everything, and there's not even a comparison at all. Over here, we're going to look at Arizona. Arizona has a big difference over here in terms of the white to Hispanic population. That seems pretty significant. Again, though, the unarmed counts for a fair-sized chunk, but over 7 years, keep this in mind as I've had these numbers on the side here. Even though that number looks bad, remember, this is over a 7-year period. You can count those numbers up yourself of the unarmed and the unclear, divide that by 7, and you get the average per year. It's not a lot, and that's why I'm not taking these arguments of police brutality like everyone else has been saying. We're going to go to Arkansas. Arkansas, you can see the race division right there. Moving on. Allegedly armed way outswamps everything else. Not even a comparison. Now, if you look in the unarmed spot, there are quite a few deaths of African Americans that are unarmed. You can look case by case if you want, but even so, you cannot call that genocide. Over a 7-year period, you cannot call that genocide. California, this one was so crazy high that it overswamps the entire screen. However, still though, the allegedly armed far outtakes everything else. And the vehicle's not a lot, but if you include that too, it still doesn't even make a dent. Moving on to Colorado. Colorado's got a fairly even white and Hispanic, and then you've got the black population there as well, which would make it equal to or greater than the white population. But still though, those who were allegedly armed, I'm most likely considering that to be a justified killing, still far outweighs everything else. Keep that 99% number in mind. Connecticut, allegedly armed. There's not a lot of killings here. 36 people over 7 years. That's about 5 per year. And look at that. The allegedly armed is half of that number, even if you don't include the 2 vehicle killings. Moving on to Delaware, again, not much information here. 20 people over 7 years. And look at that. 3 unarmed people over 7 years. District of Columbia, mostly black. I don't know much about the District of Columbia myself. But still though, 4 unarmed, 2 unclear, 1 vehicle, and then all the rest allegedly armed. Florida's got some pretty sizable numbers, 540. Most of them white, but there's a huge black population there as well. And again, the allegedly armed is massive. The unarmed is still a larger number, and this is actually the largest unarmed ratio that we've seen so far. But keep in mind, over 7 years. You can count these up yourself on your own free time. Over 7 years' time, that's barely anything. Georgia. Georgia is one of the few instances where the African American population killed by police officers is equal to or greater than the white population. But still, you look here at the allegedly armed, and it is so much larger than the unarmed. And then you include the vehicle in it, and it makes it even greater. This is what we would call statistically significant. Hawaii, allegedly armed, far outdoes everything else. Idaho. Idaho's got so few numbers, and there's only 3 unarmed people. I had a little bit of a sad chuckle, because on one end, it is sad that any life is lost, but at the same time, it's not exactly a good look that the 1 black person who died was unarmed. But then again, this is over 7 years. 1 black person killed by cops over a 7-year period of time. Kind of an important note. Illinois. Illinois is significantly larger of the black population than the white population killed, but still, allegedly armed way overtakes it. Indiana, and then there's Indiana's allegedly armed numbers. Still huge. For Iowa here, here's an important point. Every single of the allegedly armed black individuals, that is all of them. That is every African American that is recorded as being killed by police from 2013 to 2019. That is a big deal. Here's Kansas. You can see that there's not a lot of information here. You can count the African Americans killed there. This is still not considered genocide. If you look at Kentucky, over a 7-year period, still looking at the allegedly armed and the unarmed, no African Americans unarmed killed. 1 that is unclear, that is still a significant number to keep in mind. Here's Louisiana. You can see the numbers all side by side again. Unarmed is severely overtaken by the allegedly armed and the vehicle. Here we are in Maine. The 1 black individual was unarmed. Everyone else, all 30 of the others, were not black. Here in Maryland, Maryland has a significantly higher number of African Americans killed, and still, a good portion of them were allegedly armed. Now the difference here in Maryland is Maryland's numbers actually don't look good. This is an area where we could say something might need to be addressed. The unarmed numbers are, let's say, about half of the allegedly armed. We would need to look at those individual cases and evaluate whether or not this killing was considered unjust. By the way, if you look at the cause of death, something I've noticed is this idea of banning chokeholds is kind of a red herring. And I can get into that in another video. We can do this same thing on this same website in another video. But so few people were killed by chokeholds that it's almost completely insignificant. So for all of this, we got to ban chokeholds thing. The numbers don't show that it's a bigger deal. The numbers would show that it is by gunshot that most of these people die. Massachusetts, not a lot of information, but you can count it up yourself. Here's Michigan, fairly close to even numbers between white and black, and almost all of them were allegedly armed or in a vehicle. Here's Minnesota. Allegedly armed takes up a whole lot of it, only 3 vehicle, but notice that that's 2 of the people in the African American community. Mississippi, and Mississippi's allegedly armed. Missouri. Missouri's allegedly armed. That's a big deal. Look at all of that overlap. Look at how huge that is in comparison. And the vehicle portion is bigger than the unclear portion. Moving on to Montana. No African Americans. And most of them are allegedly armed or in a vehicle. Nebraska. Again, allegedly armed is so much larger. Nevada, you can see the distinction right here in race. And almost all of them are allegedly armed. The reason why I make such a big deal about being allegedly armed is because if it's a threat to the officer's life or someone in the community's life, then it needs to be stopped. Those individuals have to be stopped. New Hampshire, no African Americans. New Jersey, here's your little breakdown right there. Another one of those few states where the African American population's killed much higher and in greater numbers than the white or any other community. And still, though, most of those filter into the allegedly armed or the vehicle. New Mexico. New Mexico, this makes sense because it is a border state. So there is going to be a higher Hispanic population than in a lot of other places. We'll see this again when we get to Texas. And again, most of it fits into the allegedly armed. Here in New York has higher numbers of African American deaths than white people. But, again, most of them fit into allegedly armed. And so I'm willing to put my money on the fact that a lot of these deaths were probably justified if the individual in question had a weapon and was making an advance. And again, the 2 in the vehicle, I would consider that justifiable because even they are confident enough to put them into this vehicle category. North Carolina, and North Carolina is allegedly armed. North Dakota, no African Americans. Ohio, and again, almost all of them allegedly armed. Oklahoma got a bad rap earlier, as you saw in the evaluations. Keep this in mind. A lot of them are in the allegedly armed category. Oregon. Pennsylvania, here's your race. And there's your slide on Pennsylvania by armed status. Again, I can't stress it enough. Take a look at the allegedly armed and the vehicle numbers of African Americans, and then look at the unarmed and unclear. There is a huge difference in numbers, and it is important to point this out because we don't want to paint people as being racist if that may not be the case. The aggressor needs to be brought down, and we hate for him to be brought down by death, but I'll get to that at the end of this video. Rhode Island, we had 4 African American deaths, and look at that. 3 of them were allegedly armed. The one that is unarmed, we could look into that case individually, but this is still over 7 years. That means that the police in Rhode Island, according to these numbers, which are supposed to indict the police for police brutality, would argue that less than 1 person a year would die in Rhode Island by police's hands. That doesn't sound like police brutality to me. South Carolina, here's your race separation. And then, again, the allegedly armed. South Dakota, all of it together, no African Americans in this bunch. Here's Tennessee. I live about 20 minutes away from Tennessee. I don't understand why this doesn't make a big deal. Here's Texas. Texas is another one where I told you we'd have a big Hispanic population, and the black population's pretty significant there as well. It may not look amazing, but do you remember what I was saying earlier about how all of this took place over a 7-year period? Can you even count this as genocide? Texas has a little bit worse numbers than everywhere else, but can you really count that as genocide? Here's Utah, all of it lumped together, allegedly armed and vehicle overtake everything else. Vermont, no African Americans. Here's Virginia, and then Virginia's allegedly armed. Washington, and then Washington's allegedly armed. And even there, the vehicle being equal to or greater than the unclear makes it even more daunting when put up against the unarmed and the unclear together. West Virginia. Here's Wisconsin. And there's Wisconsin's allegedly armed numbers. Wyoming, no African Americans. And that is all 50 states. So the reason why I wanted to share all of this with you is there's so much misinformation that's spread out there, and there's so many people who are speaking for political gain. I want to get to the truth. And I want you guys to have the truth. So I don't mean to be a reporter or a journalist or anything like that. I hate that. I hate what I'm doing right now. But I don't see anyone doing this. Even my boy Steven Crowder, I don't see him going through detail like this. If you keep in mind all of this information I told you, let's go back to that first slide that I was talking about, the 99% of officers go without punishment. If every one of those, or even if 80% of those allegedly armed cases were justified shootings, that number drops down so small, it's barely even significant. And we could deal with it better, case by case, if you were to take out all of those allegedly armed cases and all of those vehicle cases. This matters. And this matters because we are spreading this idea of genocide and about how African Americans are not safe around police. But if we look at this, if we look at these numbers that are given from a website, remind you, seems to be, as I would put it, anti-police and very critical of police departments. Even their numbers say that we're not experiencing genocide. Truth matters, and truth is important, and we've got to start telling the truth about what's going on in our country and in our police departments. If you guys have any questions, please place them below. I'm not going to tell you to be cordial and to be kind in the comments because of some fluffy reason. I want you to be kind and slow to anger in the comments, because I want to remove a barrier of disagreement and emotion. I want to remove that from the scenario so that we can actually talk about reality and we can talk about the numbers that we see. If you have something to prove me wrong, please show me. I can't look at everything, and I'm not going to trust every link that somebody drops because I don't want to get a virus. But if you point me in the right direction, I'd be happy to look at the information. But all I am saying is from this source, which left-leaning people like John Oliver are using to support their position of police brutality and genocide, I do not see that. And the more that I look at it, the less that I believe them. That's all I got for you today. Go ahead and call me a racist if you want. I really don't care. At this point, so many people have been called racist for stupid things. You know, whatever. Call me whatever you want. Your opinion doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is God's opinion. And the only individual's opinion that I should really care about on this earth is my wife's. And my wife knows me. So, take it as you will. I just hope it gives you a good starting point to look at this stuff more honestly. I will see you guys later.